it's a space for spatial experience design journeys. It's where maybe we'll find a flash of insights and inspiration. It's a real life art and design convo. It's breaking down design cliches, possibly, talking about theory and practice, creating new worlds, emerging design philosophies, and exploring unfamiliar territories. So first up, I'm super excited to have Chris Adamick here, and you probably all know about Chris. His bio was in the post we made, but he designs environments, furniture, and products. He's also principal of Chris Adamick Design in Encinitas, California. He's worked with leading commercial furniture brands, including All Steel, Bernhardt Design, Corral, Hayworth, Martin Barchud, and Stylix. His work's been exhibited internationally and receives very prestigious design awards, including the Architecture A+ Award this year, Best in Neocon Gold, Silver, Editor's Choice, Sustainability Innovation Award, and the Good Design Award from Chicago, and the Best of Year Award and the HIP Award, which he recently won from Interior Design Magazine and Hospitality Design Magazine's Product Award. In addition, he holds design leadership roles with independent consultancies like Pentagram in New York and Rios in Los Angeles. Chris has been an instructor here at Art Center and has worked in-house with iconic American clothing brand, The Gap, to lead their creation of new store environments. I have a little history with Chris too. So when Chris was a student here, he was part of our collaboration with Tamar University in Tokyo. And he's with the first group, we call it Pacific Rim, where he was living and studying in Tokyo along with some other Art Center students. And I was part of that as well. And I had the great fortune to work with Chris. We worked on a project called Teen Art Park, and that was a 2-term studio here at Art Center where we designed spaces for underserved teens to have creative expression. So a space to do things like poetry, graffiti arts, and we made a prefab whole system that was employed in Pasadena. So with all that, let me welcome Chris.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, man, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hey, man, it's good to see you.
You too. What's up to all my friends? I see some familiar faces in the feed. So what's up, guys?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Welcome. Thanks for doing this, too.
Thanks for having me. This is cool.
Of course.
Psyched to talk.
Yeah, you know what? I think when I thought about this idea, like I said, during COVID, it was a little stiff. And I think we just want to reach people more, and Art Center community and students are just very curious about what, alums are doing and designers. And, I know you have lots of stories and had quite a journey throughout. So I really, happy to have you here.
Totally.
So Chris, could you maybe just tell us a little bit about your design journey? Starting from the beginning and how you got into design. And I know that you actually have a fine arts degree also, but somehow you decided to get another undergraduate degree here at Art Center, right? So maybe just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks again for having me. I mean, I feel like me and you have so much in common in terms of the types of design we appreciate, and getting to spend time with you in Japan and with Tama, especially, completely changed my life. Even more so probably than my entire experience at Art Center. That was really formative for me. So thanks for that.
Sure.
And thanks for having me here.
My pleasure.
I guess the thing that I recognize about you that I kind of feel in my life, and that the reason that I became an artist and a designer was just that, my whole life I was just looking around me and just astounded at the stuff around. My father and my grandfather used to wrench on antique cars. So we had Model Ts around, and there were my grandfather had cars that were painted by Von Dutch and really cool pinstriping. And my mom went to art school as well. She studied fine art, was really educated from that perspective. So we were always in museums growing up, but it could be the Air and Space Museum. It could be the Natural History Museum. It might be the Fine Art Museum, but all that kind of together just made this swirling mix of stuff that, to me, it was just I wanted to be a creative person. It didn't matter necessarily what avenue it was. And I didn't really understand even necessarily that there were different kind of disciplines. I just thought, oh, I'll go to school and learn to draw, I'll learn to paint, I'll learn to make stuff, and then it'll just come out however I want it to. And so that's why I went to art school, because that's, that was the sort of thing that I thought. I thought I'll be a commercial artist. I'll go, learn how to make images, and I could like draw, and I could maybe make like album covers, which is really funny. I totally thought I was going to design for music, like design album covers. And then I actually went, and at Pentagram, I worked a lot with Paula Scher, who's like a very well-known graphic designer who has done like many of the most famous, album covers back in the day when she was kind of in that field. So it was kind of an interesting full circle moment. But yeah, I could just kind of came at it raw, like really I didn't have a very strong vision of exactly how it was going to turn out, but I just knew 100% since I was little that I was going to be in a creative field. And I sort of, that just led me straight to UCLA, and then straight from there to Art Center. And I can talk about how I got there too a little bit, but.
Yeah, that's super cool. So where were you living at the time? You're a Southern California person, right?
Yeah. So, I'm from LA. I mean, born and bred. We're like, I think if you count my great grandfather, we're like 4th generation LA Angelinos for sure. So I was born in sort of Burbank, Toluca Lake area. And then when I was, in, I don't know, I was like 10 or something, we moved to Westlake Village, which is a suburb, and then went to UCLA and lived on the west side, and then lived in Hollywood and lived in the Valley, and went out to Art Center. And so I kind of lived all around LA, but have also lived in New York City and now in San Diego.
Yeah, sounds like growing up in the Southern California culture really influenced the way you see the world too,
100%. Just the car culture, especially. I mean, we used to live, I don't know if you know the Bob's Big Boy on Riverside, but we lived like a block or 2 blocks or something from there. And we used to just walk down there, and they have car shows.
In Toluca Lake?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Did your dad show his cars there?
I'm sure he did. I can't recall if we definitely did like the parade stuff. Like I remember one time, this is a rad one. My dad drove Pele around when he came to town in a parade in his Model T, and I got to meet him as a little kid. Like the cool stuff like that. So yeah, I was just around customization, car culture. I'm not even a car guy, but I just it seeped in because it's like skate, car culture, surfing, like all things you do in your backyard, you can kind of create in your backyard. A lot of innovation happens in people's like in small communities, and it's like almost like tacit knowledge handed down through like local craftspeople and artisans. And also my other grandfather was an engineer, and he kind of came into it from the aerospace side, and he worked with Kodak as well. And so he was kind of on the engineering side, and that sort of plays into it too, because in LA we always say you can make anything because of the post-war sort of aerospace industry and Imagineering and all that stuff. You can make anything you want, which really definitely seeped in. Like Disney's right there too. Like I grew up, like you could walk to Disney Imagineering and animation from my house when I was a kid. Yeah. It's pretty sweet.
I mean, you can definitely sense that in the space and in the air. I mean, was there a lot of tinkering going on?
Was there a lot of what, tinkering? Oh my God. Like nonstop. Like we used to, I would build my own skateboards. We used to like build like, not like old school in the 50s where you'd build like a whatever, like put old roller skates on a plank, but like I would take like skate components and like put them on lawn chairs and try and go down hills and like try and attach rocket engines to them, and just, yeah, tons of tinkering. My dad's like that too. He could fix anything, kind of, he showed me how to change a tire and do the oil and brakes when I was a kid. We had a pit. We literally had a pit in our house in the garage, like so you could get underneath the car. It was like tons of that stuff.
Wow. So would you say, there's a sense of that customization and do it yourself and invent new modes? Do you feel like that still influences everything that you do in a way?
Absolutely. 100%. Like it's just, and it's so cool because now it's like that whole ethos is like 100% in the products that we use. Like shoes, you can customize your own shoes. Like
right.
We used to do that with Vans back in the day. You'd like send in swatches, and they would like make your skate highs with whatever swatch you sent in, or you could like pick different ones. And that was considered very avant-garde, like the coolest of the cool. And now that's like every shoe company basically does some version of customization. That's just one example, but yeah. In the commercial furniture world where I'm really working heavily, that's very much in play. And that's for like huge, the Googles of the world, right? Like big corporate entities. So it's pretty rad.
Yeah. I mean, and kind of sticking with that theme, I guess that idea of being in Southern California, it feels like, would you agree, or what do you think about the idea? There's a certain playfulness in the air too, and I mean, your work's super international. Your works in Europe, and you lived in New York. I know that we'll get to that in a while
Yeah.
too. But there's just that inventiveness, and that kind of playfulness and levity of design.
Yeah.
Like I've always remembered that, how the modernists influenced the art in terms of architecture, what they brought to California, using timbers instead of steel, and just kind of almost a do-it-yourself kind of thing, right?
Well, totally. And also just the way, I think actually even the way we approach things, because we don't, everyone in LA, or not everyone, but like for the most part, like LA is seen as a place you come to create your own life. Like people come here to be actors and musicians, and they want to do something different. And it's been that way throughout its history. I mean, at least throughout, I guess we have to say, like throughout United States history, like once that happened.
Yeah.
You can see like everyone I met growing up was very like self-starter, like do it yourself. They didn't have any there's no baggage, right? Like in New York, like if you want to be an artist, there's like a pretty heavy duty, like, art patronage, community. And there's like galleries that have been there, and they're blue chip, and everything's very like kind of like the notions around beauty and like what's acceptable are kind of, I think, especially when I was growing up, like I was noticeably more rigid than LA, which is why LA in the 90s, when I went to art school, was like literally, it was probably the best city for art in the world at the time, I would say. I mean, looking back at what happened here, like with the Mike Kelly and like some of the people I studied with, Charles Ray, Brandon Pettibon, like people like that were just like completely throwing everything out the window and starting something totally new because they didn't have that baggage. You know what I mean? Like, and I actually literally used this recently. I was working with a company called Solid Nature, and they do like the world's highest end stone material, and they're out of Amsterdam. And our pitch to them was basically like, listen, like people in Europe, people on the East Coast, like they know how to use stone, like in a very traditional, very like buttoned up, like really beautifully, like perfect, no diss whatsoever. But they're doing it in a very particular way, particular to their cultures. But why don't you come out and talk to us, and we're going to do it differently? And so we looked at like Albert Fry, how did like you build John Lautner? How do you build a house around what's the existing stone that's there, versus like the Barcelona pavilion, where you're like Misa's like cutting it into these perfect slabs, and it's all book matched and like very much around this idea of perfection and beauty and sort of mechanization. We're much more raw here. So it actually won us the job. Like we got the job because of that kind of narrative.
That's awesome. And I'm
Yeah.
excited to get to that project you just did too, where you had a collection of some stone pieces. Was that in
Yeah.
Chicago?
We did that. Yeah, we launched in Chicago. It's actually coming to San Francisco.
Yeah.
And in a month, and then LA. It's going to be in LA for a couple months, and then I think we're going to Miami. And actually, this is rad. Giulio Cappellini, who started the brand Cappellini Furniture, was at the opening. He told me he wants to show it in Milan next year. So I don't know if that's real, but
yeah. I mean, I was amazed to see the group you were showing with too. It was really an incredible collection. So I'm super excited for you, man. I'm impressed. It's amazing for that. And that had an aspect of, I mean, I guess we could fast forward a little bit and talk about this, because I was super intrigued by the brief of that. Can you talk about that? Maybe tell everybody about what that was.
Oh, the brief? Yeah. Well, dude, I mean, it's kind of a lot going on there, but like basically, I mean, basically some colleagues and I, Frank and Julie, Clementi and Julie Smith Clementi were my instructors at Art Center, and they're now close friends. And another architect out of LA, Jimenez Lay, who's like totally just brilliant, just amazing designer. We all came together and we were like saying, God, there's got to be some other way to practice design rather than just strictly like completely on the academic or like artistic side, or the complete commercial side, which is mostly kind of what I'm doing. Right. And we were looking at movements like Super Studio and like Memphis, where Frank kind of comes out of that lineage. Like he worked for Memphis back in the day in the 80s. And those guys kind of created a group of thinkers and artists around kind of bigger ideas that would then throw off things that could be commercial, but they weren't like rooted in commercial activity kind of from the start. And so what we thought was, if we formed a group, we could form a group that would basically go and curate exhibitions. Think of a really great idea, get a bunch of creative designers and artists together to around that idea, and then get a business to come together all as one to kind of push on this one idea and like really, really go somewhere with it, right? And then we can show the product somewhere. And the cool thing about it is it gives artists and designers a way into a commercial setting that they wouldn't necessarily sort of choose for themselves. And it gives these businesses a way to express themselves and to show their work in a context completely outside of their day to day. And so like everyone kind of wins. And so this one, this brand it's an Iranian immigrant who started his brand in Amsterdam. And he has stone sources in Iran that are just like out of this world, like stuff you've never seen, like things it looks like it's from outer space. It's like the coolest, most beautiful material in the world. He's developed this way with OMA, with Rem Koolhaas. He developed this like way to do the stone very thin. And you can basically build structures as tall as you want that are almost like self-illuminating. It almost looks like, you know how you can see onyx, like you can see through it sometimes, like that type of stuff. And it's very, very high tech, but very ancient at the same time. So we thought like his story of being an immigrant was so cool. And we just thought, well, he wants to come to the US, so we can give him kind of more of a sort of an entree, like an opening into our world here, especially West Coast. And we're going to do that through the idea that everyone here who's here has had some experience of coming from somewhere else. It's a diaspora, right? Like even if you're a Native American, we have one designer who's a Native American, you know, his world changed like around him, right? Like his culture was here and then we came around him. So there is this kind of notion of diaspora and sort of intermix. And so our thing was like, what if we asked each designer to design a souvenir that was a memory of their forgotten past? Like maybe their folks came from somewhere. Maybe they came directly. Maybe they've only been in the US 1 year. In my case, our family, I'm third generation. So it came from my grandfather, right? These ideas, my grandmother. And so we had these designers all kind of come up with this idea of a souvenir and then using this stone, express it. And we had this like super high tech, we could do anything. We had milling, we had cutting, we had like all kinds of like different adhesion type of stuff. It was so dope. And we got to show it at Luminaire, which is like basically Nazir actually, who started Luminaire, is also Iranian. And that's like basically, in my view, one of the best design galleries ever. I mean, except for like maybe Moss, which is gone. But Luminaire showed us. And now that they are owned by Hayworth, they have all these different spaces around the country. And so we're going to travel the show around. And then I believe at the end, we're going to auction the objects off for charity. So it's going to be really cool. It's had been such a hit so far. It's awesome.
I love it. And did you say those are coming to LA maybe or San Francisco?
Both. Yeah. San Francisco first, I think in a couple weeks actually. And then LA after that. And then hopefully my hope is Miami and then Milan if it works out. But you never know.
I love that. I mean, I hope we see more of this. You're all super successful industrial designers and you all have a history and a past, and I think kind of revisiting and doing something that has more of that philosophical or a personal story is so powerful. It's a great sort of outlet and expression for you all and for all of us to kind of understand a little more of who you are and where you come from. And I think those it seems like more of those kind of authentic stories are really what people want and what we kind of need, in these works.
People really crave it, and it's just such an opportunity to show the world different voices. Like when I mean, this, right? Like when I was coming up, like there were gatekeepers everywhere, like because there was no like Instagram, like it was magazines. Like you had to know the editor of a magazine to get your voice out there, and we did that. We like traveled to meet people and made it happen. And like you and David and everyone at Art Center hooked us up and helped us, but now it's all in our hands. Like we're the editors, we're the curators, we're our own voices.
I love this too because I think young designers and students they crave these so much because I think you're right. Just to date myself, when we were very much interested in architects, we would buy a book and we'd be like, okay, in this book I'm going to learn about this person. I would learn about their journey and their story and their philosophy and their theoretical stance. And now, we see work every 5 seconds that's old. We see work, it's good, and is it good or bad? So how do we develop, a critical filter? It is
totally
something it's really difficult for young designers too, because there's so much thrown out there so quickly, and you see something now and it's just old in 5 seconds.
You have to turn. I'm lucky because I'm with you. Like I'm still a book person. Like I have books everywhere. I'm addicted. It's awful. But I like dedicated lots of my time in my life to going to literally like hauling my ass somewhere to go look at a piece of art or architecture or design in a physical context and talk to the makers and talk to the people showing it, and be around the culture and actually be a part of something that was kind of like supportive of some of that stuff. And now I feel like I have a really high, I feel like I have a really refined kind of high bar for like what gets me excited. And so like it's pretty easy for me to know, like if something feels like I'm shopping, I'm pretty much like it's a red flag. Like if it's shoppable new, if I'm like, whoa, gotta have it, I need this, like I want to be a part of this aesthetic or this stream or whatever, I'm a little bit like maybe I got to take a step back.
Yeah.
Often the things in life that are the most I guess valuable to me, like they take time. Like there's a question mark there rather than an answer, right? And it's like I learned that in Japan straight up. Like that's 100% like my whole vibe with that strain is just like if something's giving you all the answers, it's kind of like that's a commercial product. You're going to have whiter teeth and better breath, and your house is going to be cleaner, and that's great. But with what we're talking about, there's something that's inviting your soul in, inviting you to kind of collaborate, inviting you to discover more, and that's what I look for. And I think
that's great.
Yeah.
I think you're talking about just encouraging that critical filter. And like I said, we have access to so much information, but I think we have to think about ourselves like we have a social, cultural, historical filter. Like whenever we see something, we have to kind of put that filter on to really understand it.
Totally.
So actually, I don't know if you know Eric, but he had this interesting question about like he says it's hard to discern. I don't know if you know Eric. He's a furniture designer here in LA, and he's like it's hard to tell what lives equally, or digitally, or actually makes in production. And I mean that is interesting in furniture design too. The idea of just seeing works and understanding what the reality is, or just developing that filter for those kinds of explorations. I'm not saying that's bad either. It's just like when you're exploring something, how do you do it? And it's kind of interesting because I was talking to my, my nephew was shopping for an architect on Instagram, and I was like, well, wait a minute, there's a red flag there. And he actually had interviewed all these architects that had all this amazing work, but they never built anything. So it's getting more difficult to discern that. What's your take on this conversation, on this aspect?
Oh, I think it's really interesting. It's so funny because I think back I think back on like the most powerful experiences in my life and like wonder whether a photograph, even a really good one, like could capture that feeling and spirit. Like think about the first time, I don't know, maybe you've been a million times, but like the first time I went to the Schindler House in LA, it was like, whoa. The first time I went to Sheets Goldstein, right? The Lautner House, which is in Lebowski. It's in the big Lebowski. The first time I went there, dude, I was with my parents and it was like, it was insane. Like I was getting goosebumps. I was like, what the hell? Like there's even the photographs that look rad, like it does not capture that space. You can't. Right. And especially like, and you go to some of these temples, like in the forest in Japan, and, or you're in a like a city that feels like you might be 100 years in the future, and you duck around a corner and into a courtyard and you're in like someone's like inner world, and it's like ancient. And it's like, yeah, maybe a photograph of that with some cherry blossoms above might sort of give you a like hint of that. Right. But I don't think a lot of the most powerful things can be photographed. But on the other hand, I do think there's something that's like maybe there are just messages that can only travel in that format, that they're just meant to be quick, almost like disposable kind of just a kind of chewing gum of an idea. And like that's not bad, right?
Yeah.
It's just maybe not something you want in an architect, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, in today's age, it is difficult to express a kind of sensory aspect to your design too, like the tactility, the smell, all these kind of sensories. How do you express that in your design to your clients? And as we see all of our designs digitally created in these digital spaces too, it's like how do you do that? I mean, one story I like to say is like I remember 10 years ago, right? You would show your client a digital rendering. They'd be like, oh my God, how'd you do that? It's amazing.
Yep.
And now we show our client a digital rendering and they're like, the lighting's wrong. There's no magic. So where do you have, so this is a good setup for his question is like, what's the magic you offer to your clients or to, you know, the guests that you want to be excited about your work? Or how do you deal with this? How do you create this?
Yeah, that's it. That's a really good question. It's every interaction and every client is different, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, and mostly I would just say like it all 100% has to do with trust.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got to, that's why I think, that's kind of why I think, you know, it takes so long to be successful as a designer, because you can't just, you know, you can't just come out of the gate and just have everyone trust you. Like, it takes a while for people to understand what you're about, what your skill sets are, and you have to work with the same people for years, right? To get that rapport,
Yeah.
right? And so I don't know, it's really different. I try to read, I try to not only read who I think I'm going to be talking to, but also like what format it's going to be in, how much time they might have, where they're coming from. Like, are they a finance person? Are they an art person? Are they a salesperson? And try to really meet them where they are, you
Yeah.
know? And so I have lots of tools at my disposal, right? Like we can do 3D animations, right? I can 3D print stuff. I can make prototypes. I can do sketching. I can show work that I've done before. I can show work of other designers and say, hey, like this person kind of did it like that. Like, do you like that? Like, it could be a whole mix of anything. And I just try to, I really try to pay attention to like what people need from me rather than necessarily like what I want to say. And usually that's the kind of key that opens up a lot of doors for me.
Okay, this is a great conversation. So where, I guess, you know, I mean, you're a seasoned professional, you're doing amazing stuff now and have a great body of clients. So is it kind of creating the invitation for them to understand what you're creating for them? So an access point too, you know, because I was having a conversation with some folks from Wet Design. We were over there
Cool.
last term. And, you know, they have access to all kinds of incredible technology and ways of sharing their works. But they said, you know, it was a great conversation about the idea of like, where's the invitation for people to be involved in the design? Instead of just being an audience, like you show this incredible animation. Look at this great thing I did for you. And the response is yes or no. Hate it, love it. But is there an access point, do you think, about for your clients to get excited about, like they have a little bit of an ownership in it, or a little bit of like, you know, play into it?
Oh, it's like I almost never I can't even remember a time recently in the last 5+ years that I've won a job by just showing something like ta-da, and they're like, that's amazing, let's make it. Like, it doesn't, that's totally rad. There are people who do that, and that's real. That is super cool. Not my skill. That is just not where I'm. And it's also just not, I guess I'm kind of like, you know, I was in bands a lot growing up, and I was the bass player. Like, I was linking rhythm to melody, right? And like,
Wow.
it wasn't the typical bass player like, oh, I couldn't play guitar. It was like, I actually love playing bass. It was like really rad. And I think of myself like that too, like in my business, because what I'm trying to do is take like perhaps an idea that comes from, say, a business development person, and link it to something that a salesperson and a marketing person might need, and then go back to the, you know, a person who might have to make it, right? Like a manufacturing person or operations person. And I have to be this link between all those people, and show them that I care and that I'm really listening to them and that they're part of it. And at the end of the day, if we put something out and each one of those stakeholders, including an end user, if they don't feel like they had a part in it, or it doesn't speak to them, it really and honestly directly, then I kind of feel like I've failed. You know what I mean? So my stuff starts way early. Like, it's a discussion. It's like a sidebar discussion I have with someone during some other meeting, and I'm like, have you thought about this idea? And then these kernels just sort of, they roll down the hill, and they just sort of get bigger and bigger, and they snowball into these kind of more thematic, it's like a thematic starting point rather than a kind of end point, right? Like, no one says, hey, I need a new chair. You know, occasionally that happens, but generally it's more like, hey, we're working with the theme of the multi-generational office, 5 generations working in the office together. Or, you know, for instance, with the solid nature thing, we're working with the theme of diaspora, right? So it's not like you don't start with the object at the end, the output, if that makes sense. So people really feel like they're a part of it. Does that answer your question?
It does. I mean, do you feel at this point in your career, are you at the level where you kind of, you're not making a bunch of designs in the back pocket, like, how about this one, or how about this one? It's more like you're improvising and riffing off the conversation, the dialogue, and what's happening, and then you kind of come back to it. Is that something that you you feel
Yeah.
good about now, or you feel like you're in that area, or is that a thing?
Oh, for sure. I mean, but it's all, I don't know. I mean, we all do it. Like I draw every day. I sketch until I fall asleep every day, pretty much. If I'm not reading,
Repeat
I'm
that.
drawing. What?
Repeat that. I think people need to hear this.
I draw. Oh, I draw with my hands every day. I mean, I have like, I don't know, 10 feet of sketchbooks behind me. I draw on the iPad a lot. I love Procreate is great. It's really fun because it allows you to have like a little, it's in between a 3D modeling program and Photoshop and like sketching. So it's really good because I can just, I watch YouTube. I watch like surfing on YouTube every day before bed, and I can just sketch and stuff. So then I'll have like a bunch of stuff that's like parts and pieces, like the starting point of an idea. Like, here's a interesting connection I was thinking about between two materials, or here's a thing that I ran into in my day that felt weird, and I'm gonna make a little diagram of it or whatever. And I just have that all kind of swimming in the back.
Yeah.
And then when these bigger themes emerge that we have to like, we kind of have to do something with in a commercial context, those ideas just, they kind of filter through. Like they're just there. Like, idle hands, you're not going to have any strokes of brilliance. Like, you have to move all the time. You have to draw. You have to make all the time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It feels like you're saying too that it's a lot about just playing with the design process too.
Yeah.
And it's not like you spend 20 hours rendering that one light fixture is going to get it either. It's like just using just different, faculties and different processes. And what I wanted to add on to that and ask you about too, if you would have advice, we have a bunch of design aficionados here, and actually a lot of current students too, is when you look at portfolios, right, and you see like a lot of amazing renderings, right? What do you suggest as far as process? And I think you'll probably say that process isn't just one linear design process is this one way of doing it. Here's the 10 steps to it. It's not that, right?
Right.
So what would you suggest to like people develop their portfolio, what to share along with those amazing renderings or, that kind of output design?
That's a great question. I was going to say before with this jump that I feel like I'm becoming like an anti-perfectionist. Like, it bothers me. Like the perfectionism of the Keyshot license is just bothersome to me. Like, it's almost like it's not even going to look that good when you make the thing and actually photograph it, right? Like it's so, I would say, I think I'm actually I have the same problem. Like, here's an interesting thing.
Okay.
You're going to be if I'm speaking to students who are listening now about portfolios, like, you're going to be dealing with that your whole life. Only now, instead of when I did it, we had to actually like print them. Like, I have physical prints, like bound books that I bound with stitching with my own hands that I would like bring to meetings and show people.
Yeah.
Now I think that your portfolio it's so much better in a weird way, but it's more diffuse. It's more of like everything around you. It's your website, it's your Instagram. It's like, I assume TikTok I'm not on, but maybe there's that. It's your social network, right? It's like, I feel like what you're trying to do, and this ties into design process too, is really what you're trying to do is create a life that spins off all of this sort of ammunition that you can deploy to tackle really difficult design problems. So if you have all this ammunition, if you have these thoughts, and maybe there's writings, there's readings, you're part of a group here, maybe you're doing exhibitions and you have things you make, you can kind of show all that as a kind of ongoing, I think, life within your sort of social media platforms or your website or whatever you might have. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes time to like basically, get the job, right? You then have to somehow show someone that you can take all of that information and actually like turn it into something that's viable.
Yeah.
And then you have to find a way to get that information to that person as efficiently as possible. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe you are going to sit down with someone and have an hour conversation and have a coffee. I did this with Piero Lissoni in Milan. He sat down and looked at my physical portfolio with me, and we had espresso, and it was amazing. But more likely, you're emailing an HR person who you're trying to get your foot in the door, and that person has 10 seconds. So how do you reach that person? Where are they coming from? How do you, right? Like, how do you communicate to them? So I think it's so much less important whether it's a rendering, a sketch, an image, and much more important kind of like what's behind, what surrounds all of that. It's a very different, it's like the art critic Dave Hickey had a book called Pirates and Farmers. If you've ever read that, do you know Dave Hickey?
No.
It's like you got to get air guitar. It's like the best book on art that's ever been written.
Nice.
But he had this book called Pirates and Farmers, and he was basically saying there's two types of creative people. Like, I'm a farmer. Like, farmers are people who like slowly plant seeds and they tend to their garden, and all of a sudden, like, eventually this stuff like flourishes, and then they can pick and choose and make a meal out of it. That's a farmer. A pirate is someone who's like, I'm gonna go get it, slash and burn. I'm gonna go take like some idea and just like make it my own, and I'm just gonna bust through the door. And that's a pirate. And I definitely know I'm a farmer, right? Everyone has their own thing, and I'm sure there's more to it than that. But that was sort of a way to describe sort of artistic practice or creative practice, right? And I'm much more into the farm, and like the people I dig are like way more farmers too, because then you look at like Ronan and Erwin Burlek are like my favorite contemporary designers, and they have like such a rich language of visuals and like backup. Like you go and look at their books and it's just insane, like the amount of sketches and models, and they're out like they take their stuff out into the forest and look at it in the light dappled with leaves, and like it's super rich. And like if you just took a rendering of that object, it would look like it would look stupid. It doesn't have any context.
Yeah.
Make sense?
I love this. I think I'm a forest dweller myself. But
Yeah.
but I like what you're saying too. Is it's almost like we're crafting a story that's really diverse, you know. And I think I mentioned that story about these Instagram architects. They're like, okay, it's such a focused kind of curation.
Yeah.
But you're seeing as a true creative, you're putting a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah.
And you're sharing on your platforms all these different levels and processes that you engage in to tell a really much more like interesting story. It seems like you're not really worried about the curation, because now for young designers, we're very much concerned about our situational persona.
Yes.
And we get super mad when people don't respond to our work, but they like our outfits. It's kind of like that's, I think, a tough challenge for young designers. So I think there's hope. But what you're saying is that you just not only be well-rounded, but really like take risk, with the processes you're doing, and start to share that you're this kind of, designer that can kind of think outside the box and puts different things, together, to create, the kind of their own design language to that.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the smart people are going to hire you for how you think and what you can do. You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to hire you because you have a cool outfit or whatever. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I guess I shouldn't say they won't. I guess I should say that's my experience. That's probably a better way to say that. Like, I feel like I get hired to do stuff. What's that?
You have a cool outfit.
My sweet T-shirt. No, but I think that's the aesthetic life. Like, I love fashion. Like, like my wife even says to this day, like one of the reasons she liked me is because I always only had like blank T-shirts. Like, it would be like dark jeans and blank T-shirts. This is the 90s. You know what I mean? Like, no logos, nothing. Like, Vans maybe. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's an aesthetic perspective. It's my own. It's where I come from. It's my own. It's my own world. So I think that's important. I just don't think it's the whole thing. And I also think there's like, we're used to being marketed to. Like, everyone here knows what a brand message is. Even like content that's within the sort of we all love being sold to. Content that's within the amusements that we are involved in. Like, you watch Netflix or you're watching a sporting event or whatever. There's like sponsored. My favorite surfers are wearing certain kinds of watches or whatever. Like, whatever it is. Someone, the rock star that I love is wearing certain glasses or something. We all love that, but we're also very, very hyper attuned to it, whether we acknowledge it or not. And so, like, if you're pushing on that too hard, people are going to know you're just trying to hustle. And that's like not cool. Yeah. I guess. I don't know.
No, I kind of remember like having this conversation with you like a long time ago too, like maybe 10 years
ago.
So you're discerning. I think most designers try to be really discerning too, and how we put on these personas, but also how we're projecting. We're projecting a certain image. And I think maybe there's that projecting that image, but also projecting the way in which we design too. I think that's something that we should all think about. When I talk about how we have this one device, we have this filter, but we can start to explore, right? And like I said, take risks with how we do things and what we present out there.
What are you seeing as like I love being around. I love being at Art Center because I love seeing like what risks people are willing to take. Because like when I was there, it was like there were like some pretty buttoned up folks. And like, maybe I was one of them, I don't know. But like, what are you seeing in terms of like risk taking? Like, where are people willing to go now?
That's a really good question. I think I'll just say that it's very challenging. I think people feel like they have to go a certain way. And I think just being a multidisciplinary designer has its own challenges, but it can be done. And I do see that. I think people stand out that want to do that
Yeah.
and explore that. So I guess in some ways it hasn't changed that much that way.
Well, I felt like
and also like I think the students that explore multiple like modalities, all teachers have their kind of, they're more kind of like philosophical or ideological point of view. And I think once you understand that, you can learn so much by exploring what others have to offer, other disciplines and other teachers. I think,
Yeah.
and really trying to really risk by exploring those avenues. I think that's still important. I think that's still the main thing. I think that I like to see people explore in school.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt that. I felt like you had, especially with the Axel Lives, when we did that, when I was on the jury and I've seen the subsequent winners and stuff.
Yeah.
I was really encouraged by, like, I'm very encouraged by like younger designers and younger people in general, just because like I'm not part of that life, and it's so cool for me to hear reports back from them through their work. And I thought, like, I loved seeing the way that people would take these kind of like very, I don't know, like very traditional industries, like an architecture or like a traditional product design kind of approach, and then like take those skills and that sort of design language, that way of speaking, but then like subvert it and like completely change it to be spoken in their own voice.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really, really cool. I don't really know of any other school that's doing that. Like, does that make sense? Like, because I feel like if you look at like,
and I think when you were in school, we call it environmental design. Now we call it spatial experience design.
Yeah.
But I think this department does really encourage that kind of thinking, that multidisciplinary kind of thinking. And our students are looking at industrial design and furniture and product and graphics and all these things. So I think probably I just have to say this is like more like a forerunner of that kind of thinking in this department. But to kind of add on your question, I think other students from other departments I'm seeing more of that too, more of that kind of thinking. From interaction design, and product designers. They're really wanting to take classes from spatial experience design too. They want to design more. They want to design like the space around the things that they do. And I love seeing that too.
Yeah,
I love seeing that.
Well, it's interesting. It's so interesting because it's like if you look at the model of the Bauhaus or whatever, and that's sort of in a sense how Art Center was formed. Like it's been so misunderstood to be this kind of mechanized early modernist thing, but in reality they were nuts, dude. They were doing like dances and costumes and like happenings basically before that was a thing, and they were thinking of messaging, and I mean, effectively it was, this is, I guess, before Herbert Bayer, but it was like effectively branding before such a thing existed, in a sense of having a message that could travel through all these different vectors and touch you at all these different touch points. And I think about it so much because like I have to travel for work all the time, right? And so I have like the hotels that like I need to stay at, and like everyone's like, oh, how much space do you need? What's the closet like? And I'm like, I don't give a shit. Like it's how it smells, it's what the lighting is like, it's what the sound is like. What is my experience when I walk outside? What is it like in the morning when I need to get a coffee and go? Like all those things are so much more important than like whatever like shape sofa they have or like whatever. Does that make sense? Like it's so rich and kind of like has so much depth to it. Like the decisions I'm making as a consumer, that I think people, especially in interaction design, is a great example. I have a lot of friends who do that. Like they really understand that there's so much more to it than just like pushing buttons on a phone or like trying to, we would learn in school about like, what's it like to go to an ATM, and like, what's the experience like of being like kind of nervous that someone might, come up behind you or like take your passcode or something. There's so much more now that people are incorporating, which I love.
It's so fascinating, and I think you're right. I'm seeing a lot more interaction design students really interested in spatial experience design, and it really makes me think about
Yeah.
long ago in school. I remember thinking about this: is that what's the primary fundamental public and social architecture
Yeah.
originally?
Yeah.
And we would say it's banks and churches.
There you go.
And banks and churches, they're really kind of not a place, maybe. You know what I mean? Like a bank isn't. A church can be a sanctuary or an inner sanctum, but it's kind of like, that's shifted completely, that idea of what that kind of means as a space.
Yeah. No, totally. And we use terms from planning and like what urban planners talk about just in our day to day, right? Like the commons, right? Like the public square. You know what I mean? Like it's just and these are all kind of concepts that travel and like touch us in different ways.
Hey Chris, I got a question for you. So the furniture we see in Grand Park, LA, that's part of your design, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting. I would talk about that furniture design. I don't know if this is correct, but the idea of people interacting in public spaces differently now, and how we always thought, well, fixed furniture, right? Because fixed furniture is good in public because people aren't going to destroy it, they're not going to steal it.
Yeah.
But what was the idea? Maybe it shifts a little bit, but what was the idea of doing that? Because I go there sometimes and I think about, and if I'm there with students and I see the bright pink fuchsia furniture, I'm like, oh, Chris Adamick designed this stuff. So, did you guys think about this? The idea how people interact differently in public spaces, and that they can regroup, or they're not going to steal it. It's more about people engaging in that kind of space.
Yeah, well, you hit it on the head. I mean, one of the inadvertently wise things I did early in my career was to go work for Frank Clementi and Bob Hale and Julie Smith Clementi and Mark Rios. And they had a firm called Rios Clementi Hale Studios. It's now called Rios. They're huge. They're like international now. But at the time when I went, it was like 14 or 15 people, maybe something like that. And they just, they're cowboys, and their approach to urban planning and design was quite different at the time. I mean, this is, mid-aughts, right? When I graduated, I guess.
Right.
And when we were doing, they were maybe 2 years into the design of that park probably when I got hired, right? And I remember it took, I don't know, 3 or 4 more years to finish it. And the big idea was exactly that. It was a new kind of stake in the ground for public space, right? And it was saying, look, like, we aren't the East Coast. This isn't Bryant Park. Like, even though Bryant Park has movable furniture, that's kind of why I thought about that. Right. But that's a privately funded situation, right? I mean, there's like a private entity behind that. Like, this is like true public architecture, public work. And it was thought of as a big backyard. Like, at the time, downtown was really struggling. Like, there was no one. I mean, it was like it was the arts district, but when it was the arts district because it was affordable for artists to live there, and like, so then it was like the only people who would ever use that park were jurors. Cause I mean, I remember doing jury duty there and like there was like one sad coffee cart and that was it. And you kind of didn't want to be in the park. Right. So when we redid it, the whole idea was it was a big backyard and it was meant to basically encourage like public trust and create a commons for people. And part of that was saying like, look, we're not just going to provide a cafe chair and table and a park bench with an arm in the middle so you can't sleep on it and you can't sleep under it. We're going to make it so people can move these things around. We're going to do lawn chairs. We're going to do lounge chairs. We're going to make it so if you want to put your feet up, you can drag this thing over and put your feet up under the shade of a big, beautiful tree. And we're going to make them bright magenta to stand out against all the green we have, which is these giant lawns that can be programmed in all these different ways. And then we found a manufacturing partner, which was Janice AC, she went to Art Center as well. And so she produced it and then turned that into a product line, which she sells. And they just did a new park with it somewhere, Rios did, and did it in a different color and stuff. So it's been cool to see it kind of live on. And it was pretty wild because that idea of having like a movable lounge chair that people could just take if they wanted to in a park was just, people were like, you're going to lose your shirt. Like, there's no way people aren't going to steal these. And they totally didn't because they recognized that it was like a public good and that it should remain there. So,
yeah. I want to follow up on that question. And then also want to let people know that, and thanks a lot for this, Chris, but people, you can ask, everybody here, you can ask questions in our question box. So just ask a question in a question box. And I want to ask Chris one more question and then maybe we can take some questions, Chris. But I mean, and now just to come to the future of your line of work now, is this stuff, we used to have this dialogue with ongoing for 10 years now, the the third space, and people taking ownership of public space and people like, working more remotely and nomadic. Is that still, how's that theme shifted? Because we know that theme well, nomadic working. And I know your work so much is about designing spaces and furnishings around the workplace.
Yeah.
What are you seeing that we don't know about, or what are you thinking about with this?
I guess I'm not I'm not so sure I've seen anything you don't know about, but the conversations, because everyone, we all live this, right? But what we're trying to do is, we're trying to, we're trying to read the label from inside the bottle, right? Like we're living it. It's so hard to create. That's why cultural critics are so important to us, because they can give us that play-by-play of like what we're living through. And so the discussions I'm having are much more around this idea of ecosystems. So the third space came about. I mean, people talk about like Howard Schultz, right, from Starbucks, essentially capitalizing on the idea of this emerging third space that he saw in Europe that we didn't have here. And then he actually took it to Asia, which is like bananas.
Right.
Cloterrife, right? He was able to brand coffee, sell coffee to people who drink tea. Anyway, so the third space was really like, that's like a critical moment in our culture. But now it's like we have this ecosystem, right? There's, if you're a high-powered executive, you might also be a mom, right? And you've got you got to drop your kids off, and maybe you have like a spin class at a certain point, and maybe there's a smoothie shop in there, and there's Wi-Fi, and maybe you're in a car commuting somewhere, maybe you might be in an airport. We know that a lot of the people who are in these spaces the most are actually in leadership positions. Like think of the CEO. They're on their Gulfstream somewhere else. They're definitely not at HQ. Do you know what I mean? And even down to the first, like you're an intern, like you're walking to the bus in the morning. There's I don't know, like you might meet your friends for, somewhere, and you're working and you're living and all this stuff is all sort of taking place in all these spaces that are not traditional. It's like you might be relaxing in a place that's not your house, right? You might be watching YouTube in a place that's a public space. You might be on a conference call in a place that's a public space or a commercial space. And so we look at it as, totally just an ecosystem. And how, there's this idea of the 15-minute city. You can walk to anything or get to anything you need to do within 15 minutes of where you currently are. And that's the kind of an urban planning dream that people have been having for the last 20, 30 years, which is starting to kind of happen. I mean, that's how I live, straight up. So that's cool. So does that make sense? Like, I think the third space is one part of a bigger thing.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to be evolving, because we had this dialogue for a while. And then to add on that, do you see the need, or do you think about the boundaries of that too? Like, do people start to gravitate towards public spaces and like, well, I'm doing my work here, and when they go home, is there a boundary of work and not work psychologically or philosophically, so that the kind of furnishings come to play into that?
Definitely. I mean, we're having a public health crisis, mental health crisis because of this. Like people we can't determine, like it's not like you just go home and you get to shut off and you get to be with your family or your friends or yourself. It's not like that anymore. Like you're getting, especially probably I would imagine young people coming up, you're kind of hustling. You're expected to answer emails in the middle of the night. Like, especially if you're a marketing person, you got to be on it. Yeah. And I think people are definitely responding to that. Like one of the big cues we're taking in the world of workplace is like neurodiversity. And we all, by the way, have, different neurodiverse profiles, right? Every person. And the idea that we might need to, have a sanctuary for a moment and be somewhere not loud and be somewhere alone, or we really might thrive in an environment that's a more traditional third space, like a cafe, where I need some noise to get me hyped to do this thing that's not maybe exciting. What does it mean to go home and to have that refuge, right? Like, how can I shut off? How can I really have that? Even if it's not a big space, it's my space, right? All those questions are really vital. And like and they do 100% filter into everything we do in the world of furniture. I mean, I'm literally working on a presentation like at this moment, just before this call, taking these ideas into play.
It's so important. I mean, I think we used to be so excited about nomadic working, and we all have that image of the guy on the beach working with a laptop, which is impossible, this is amazing. But I think, we did a project a few years ago in Japan talking about knowledge workers, and what they wanted. And our students thought, hey, guess what? You get to work at home for 2 days a week. Isn't that amazing? And
Yeah.
every single person they interviewed said, I don't want to do that. I want to
Not,
work in an office. I don't want to work at home. But
not in
as
Japan.
designers, sometimes we have to really open up, right, our mind and think about the diverse users and their, mindset too. And that's going to be
It's
challenging for young designers.
it's challenging for everyone. It's so easy to fall in the trap of just your own the limits of your own mind. Like, oh, I don't have kids, so no one has kids. Oh, I'm not a mom, no, so no one's a mom. Or I don't have mobility issues, so no one else has mobility issues. Or it's easy for me to, grab a knob and turn it, so no one else has that issue. It's actually just so hard to be
Yeah.
empathetic. And so what we try and do, like when I with my teams, like really, I just literally try and go in a room, show some work, and shut up and just listen to people tell me about their life. Like I'm going to Kansas City next week to do that. I'm going to be in Texas next month. I'm going to be in Iowa next month. Like that's what I do. I just go places with people that aren't like me and listen. That's
Yeah.
it.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, I would say that's a great point. That's great advice, I think, for young designers. I mean, I'll just say, one project I designed a spa, that in
Yeah.
Beverly Hills, and
Yeah.
I remember I wanted this one. I had this beautiful chair I wanted people to sit in and do this job. Um, they were doing facial work, right? And this person had to sit in that chair for 10 hours. Like, this is an awesome chair. You're gonna love it. She hated the chair, and I was a
Yeah.
bad person. And so,
Yeah.
but I learned a lot about that too. Is just really thinking about the use,
Totally.
of that, and not just my own ego of this is a beautiful thing, but really thinking about it from the different stakeholders and just different people you're designing for too. I think you probably become more sensitive to that. I'm sure
Yeah.
in your position.
Well, and my thing, it's funny because it's almost like, people are so into this idea of minimalism, and it's because we're bombarded, right? We're bombarded with commercial messages, and like we're bombarded with keeping up with our friends, and these, trying to be something that we're not in a social, commons. And we're just worked, never, so everyone wants less. And the real idea is, I mean, often, like to your point, like probably she needed you to just get out of the way a little bit. Like a lot of the time what I'm trying to do is like give my clients less design. I'm like, you need to do less. Like let's like take this obstacle out of the way. We're just going to remove this obstacle, and that'll be enough to sell this to someone, because they'll be like, wow, I don't have that thing. That's great.
Yeah,
I do that all the time. That's like very much a part of what I do,
yeah,
I would say.
that's super powerful. Um, So, Chris, I think because we've been talking for an hour, thanks so much for
Cool.
this. I just want to
Yeah.
ask anybody if they have any questions, they can put it in the question comment. Um, Now's the time.
Yeah. It's all good if you don't too.
Here's one. Do you have
Right.
it? So the question is, how do designers anticipate the generational divide between what people want now and what might be needing in the future?
Great question. If you find out, let me know, because we'll start a business and we'll kill it. No, but it's real. I mean, there's entire industries that are like trend forecasting, right? Liwi Edelcourt is the one. Like she's like the crown jewel of that world, and she comes out of a really well known school in I believe Amsterdam. But anyway, basically it comes down to empathy again. Like you're kind of just it's the same thing as like stock traders. They're just looking at all the events going around the world. What do we think is going to happen, right? Is there civil unrest in this part of the world? Is there a environmental catastrophe happening over here? Like what's happening with this subset of culture in this part of the world? And you kind of just whatever stakeholders that you are designing for, you really just approach it with fresh eyes and just like being a beginner's mind, as they say in like Zen Buddhism, right? Beginner's mind. Like,
Yeah.
nothing, just like go and be a fly on the wall and listen to them. And then pretty often you can kind of see, you'll start to see a trajectory, and you might not be like exactly on the line, but like you'll be pretty close. You won't be like way over here, you'll be like pretty close. So that's the best I can do, really.
Dude, I love that. I mean,
Yeah.
beginner's mind, that's such great advice. And I'm still kind of grappling with like reading the label from inside the bottle. But I think
I stole
I
that
think,
from Scott Galloway.
oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to be thinking about that one for a while. Hey, man, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. It's something I really want to bring to our community. It's just having, just like, random off the cuff kind of conversations
Yeah.
about your journey, as opposed, I mean, we could have a presentation or a talk where you show all your incredible work for hours, but I thought this is something a little different that people are also hungry for, having more just authentic conversations with people and creative passions, design world, and we even didn't get to that too much, but thanks again, my friend.
Dude, great to see you. Great work. I can't wait to see the next few of these. I hope you have more cool
Yeah,
people
we got a
on, my
great one
friends
coming
and stuff.
up to preview. Connie Bakshi's coming up in a couple of weeks.
Sweet. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, all right, man. Take care, buddy.
All right.
See ya.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.